Hello, and thank you for joining me for Storytime with Mr. C. I am Mr. C, and if you are back for more, welcome back. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, welcome to the show. If you like what you hear, please go check out my other 16 episodes. Here on Storytime with Mr. C, I will be sharing stories that I have written, or a friend or family member has written, or maybe even something you have written. If you would like for me to share one of your stories here on Storytime with Mr. C, get your story or stories ready to go, and shoot me an email at storytimewithmisterc@gmail.com. I have also put that email down in the description for your convenience. For now, I'm going to ask that you please keep stories to a maximum of 2,000 words, and please keep them family-friendly. And maybe I will read one or more of your stories in future episodes. As always, a big, huge thank you goes out to my buddy Russ for helping me out with my intro music. Russ is the bassist for local Tucson band Drive By High Five. If you ever get the opportunity to check them out, please do so. Also, as always, a huge thank you goes out to Ben over at Chasing the Whimsy. You can find the link to his podcast down in the description as well. Please go check that out. Show Ben some love. Thank you, Ben, again and always, for your continued support and your enthusiasm for all things podcast related. So, here we are, a mere handful of days before Halloween. Again, the most fantabulous time of the year. Are you ready? Are you all set? I myself am not. I still have so much to do. The list is massive, but I will get it done because that's just how it goes. All right, last week I treated you to something old, which was spooky story number 4. I certainly hope you enjoyed that. For this, our 17th episode, I will be sharing our next spooky story, number 5, which I just finished writing Friday. And this is going to be our last spooky story for a while. Not necessarily the last ever, but for now. Next week, we will be moving on to the stories of the matriarchs. These will be our next round of autobiographical stories, but these were not written by me. These were written by my mom, and her mom's mom. So please, make sure you come on back for all of that. All right, folks, enough babbling. Here we go with episode 17. Stand by.
Storytime with Mr. C. Storytime.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Storytime with Mr. C. This is spooky story number 5. I call this one Psychopomp and Circumstance. The clock over the nurse's station was frozen at 11:47, its second hand trembling in place, forever clicking but never advancing. Irene stared at it for a long time, then sighed and scribbled her initials on another intake form. Her first week at St. Gloria Memorial had been relatively calm, but she still felt like she had a long way to go. The ER was small, with 6 curtained bays and a nurse's station that always smelled like antiseptic, caffeine, and nicotine. The buzz of the overhead fluorescence was constant, and the air was filled with muffled sounds of the night crew doing their night things. Most of the folks who came here never made it home again, and those who did often wished they hadn't. Irene did like the night shift, though. Easier, quieter, nobody breathing down her neck, but the main reason she preferred working nights. It kept her out of the house when Leonard was at his worst. He always seemed to get more agitated in the evenings. She rubbed the bruise on her wrist, hidden just beneath her sleeve. It was still tender from yesterday's argument, and Irene wasn't even sure what it had been about. Dinner? Money? Maybe nothing at all, but Leonard didn't need reasons. Liquor was all the fuel he needed for his particular fire. A door banged open at the end of the hall, and Irene flinched. "We've got one coming in," hollered Dr. Kemper, looking like he probably just woke up. "Male, mid-30s, gunshot wound to the abdomen. Let's go, people." Irene rose automatically, pulled some gloves from the box, and forced herself to breathe evenly. Work, she reminded herself, was order. Work was control. Work was something she could handle. The doors to the ER hissed open, and the paramedics hustled in. A man on the gurney, his shirt soaked with blood, his eyes wide and glassy. "Accidental discharge," one of them relayed. "Hunting rifle." Irene took over for the other paramedic and applied pressure to the man's abdomen as Kemper barked instructions. Blood was everywhere. The color, the smell. It always hit her the same way, a wave of nausea followed by a strange sense of calm. "Let's get another unit of O-neg going," Kemper commanded. "This guy's leaking like a sieve." Irene's movements were sure and efficient as they rolled into Bay 4. She could follow orders, and she felt best when she was moving. She and the rest of the team did all they could, but by 12:30, the man's body was already in the basement, parked in the hospital morgue. Irene quietly cleaned the bay afterward, mopping up the blood and restocking supplies. She even scrubbed the floor until her reflection swam faintly in the linoleum. It was almost 2 a.m. when she finally sat down again and stared at the frozen clock. 11:47. Always 11:47. "Place gives me the creeps at night," murmured Madison, one of the orderlies, as she leaned against the doorway. "And it always gets so cold after someone dies." Irene nodded, but said nothing. At some point, Madison must have wandered off, and Irene found herself checking the clock as she poured another cup of burnt coffee. The sliding doors at the front entrance hissed open, and Irene looked up. No ambulance, no paramedics, nothing but silence. Then a soft, shuffling sound. A woman appeared in the doorway, pale, gaunt, wearing nothing but a nightgown and an old coat. Her feet were bare. Irene stood. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The stranger shuffled forward, and the doors slid shut behind her. Irene stepped out from the nurse's station and carefully approached the woman, whose eyes were wide and unblinking. "Oh, it's all right, dear," the woman said. "I'm already dead." The words hung in the air, so soft Irene wasn't sure she'd even heard them right. "Excuse me?" Irene asked, stopping just in front of the woman, who smiled faintly. "I died an hour ago, out on Route 32. The driver didn't even stop." A thin ribbon of blood trickled down her left leg, dark, syrupy, almost black. Irene reached out her hand. "Let's get you looked at. What's your name?" The woman tilted her head. "You don't remember me?" Irene froze. The woman's eyes seemed to shimmer under the harsh fluorescent lights. Did they change color? "Bay 4, Irene said without thinking, and ushered the woman toward the curtain. The woman nodded and shuffled toward the empty bay without another word. Irene followed, her throat suddenly dry. Somewhere down the hall, the broken clock clicked once, and the second hand began to move again. Irene stepped behind the thin green curtain to find the woman already sitting perfectly upright on the edge of the gurney. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's start with your name, sweetheart." The woman smiled faintly as if she had been waiting for the question. "You can call me Eleanor." Irene looked down at the clipboard in her hands and saw that she had already scribbled the word Eleanor at the top of the intake form. She must have been more exhausted than she realized. "All right, Eleanor, do you know what day it is?" "Of course I do," Eleanor said as she tilted her head. "It's Saturday. But not this one." "I'm sorry," Irene said. "What do you mean?" "Not this Saturday. The other one." Irene scribbled on the clipboard. Delusional, disoriented, possible concussion. "Can I take your blood pressure, Eleanor?" Eleanor nodded and extended her arm. Her skin was cool to the touch. Irene positioned her stethoscope. The cuff inflated and hissed, but Irene wasn't hearing anything. She frowned, adjusted the stethoscope, and tried again. Nothing. She glanced at Eleanor. Eleanor's expression didn't change. "I told you," she said. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Where did you say this happened? Irene finally asked. Route 32, Eleanor said. Just past the bridge. I was walking home. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, not frightened, not confused. Irene cleared her throat. Do you remember what the car looked like? Eleanor smiled and placed her hand on Irene's, cold and firm. You should know, dear. You were there. What? Irene said. Eleanor didn't answer. She just looked at Irene and patted her hand gently. Irene felt herself slipping. I'm going to get the doctor, Irene stammered, pulling her hand away and backing toward the curtain. Dr. Kemper can't help you right now, dearie, Eleanor said. He's busy downstairs. Irene froze. How can you know that? Well, because I was just with him, Eleanor said. He wanted me to tell you that he is very sorry. The blood drained from Irene's face. That's not funny. Eleanor's smile softened. Well, it wasn't meant to be. Irene pushed through the curtain as her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She looked to the nurse's station. Empty. No Madison, no Kemper. Where the hell was everyone? Dr. Kemper, she called out. Madison? Nothing but the omnipresent buzz of the fluorescents and the ticking of that damn clock. She tried the intercom. Dead static. The lights in the ER flickered once and then dimmed. She turned back to Bay 4. The curtain was open. The gurney was empty. A series of damp footprints led out and down the hall, fading as they trailed around the corner. Irene followed because something inside her demanded it. The footprints ended at the top of the stairs that led down to the basement, to the morgue. She hesitated. She'd only been down there once, and she did not care for it. The hum of the refrigeration units, the way the lights never seemed bright enough, but she needed to find someone, anyone, to help anchor her to reality. Her footsteps echoed in the stairwell as she descended. She reached the bottom, and the corridor stretched out ahead of her, tiled and pale yellow and lined with so many doors. The air was cold and chewed at Irene's lungs. The lights flickered, and she saw movement at the far end of the corridor, a figure, desaturated and leaning. Doctor? She whispered. The shape shifted, the lights flickered, and the corridor emptied. A door sat open, halfway down, a weak light spilling out. Irene forced herself forward, her shoes squeaking on the tile. She approached the open door, and her breath hitched. She stepped inside. A table sat in the center of the room. The man with the gunshot wound lay on it, the sheet pulled up over his face. His right hand was visible, extending out from under the sheet, a sickly shade of yellow, waxy, resting with the palm up as if searching for an offering. Irene's stomach turned. Something moved behind her. She spun around to find Eleanor standing by the wall, her face lit by the harsh lights of the morgue. Her skin looked different, wrong, almost translucent. Do you believe me yet? She asked. I don't understand, Irene choked. Eleanor stepped closer and the light dimmed as if recoiling from her. You keep thinking you're here to save people, she said, but that's not your purpose. What are you talking about? You were supposed to walk away that night, Eleanor said. You didn't. Irene shook her head. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, Eleanor said softly. You remember the rain, the headlights, the way the world stopped? Irene's mouth opened, but the words refused to come out. You hit me, Eleanor said, and you never stopped. The silence pressed in on Irene like waves of water. The lights flickered, and for just a moment the man's body was replaced by another, the petite form of a woman, broken and bruised. Irene saw her own face, eyes open, jaw slack. She staggered back, knocking over a tray of instruments. The clatter of metal against tile echoed down the corridor. She looked back up, and the bed was empty. Only the sheet remained, the faint impression of a body still pressed into it. Irene stumbled backward until her spine struck the cold tile wall. Her breath became shallow and disjointed, as if she had forgotten how to breathe. Eleanor's voice echoed through the morgue, coming at Irene from multiple directions. "You were tired," she said. "He'd been drinking again, and you thought just one more errand before home. Just one more short moment of peace." Irene shook her head violently, trying to detach Eleanor's words. No, I wasn't." "You only looked away for a second," Eleanor continued, stepping closer. "And then the rain mixed with glass and flesh." The temperature dropped suddenly and frost began to creep along the edge of the table. Irene's reflection in the stainless steel cabinet fluttered and shifted. It wasn't her at all, but Leonard, mouth open in anger, smeared black with blood. "Stop it," she screamed, grabbing for the door, but the handle was slick and her fingers came away red. Behind her, the freezer doors groaned open and the trays slid out one by one. On each one rested a different version of Irene, each in a different uniform, all with bruises spreading across their wrists and neck. One turned its head to Irene and whispered, "You're not saving anyone. You've been making the rounds for years." Eleanor was beside her again, her voice almost tender now. "You helped them cross, Irene. You always have." Irene jerked away. "What are you?" Eleanor stepped fully into the light as her coat and nightgown fell away. Her face sagged and shifted, eyes hollow like burned craters, leathery wings unfurling from her back, skin glistening with colors of old oil and ash. Her voice was both whisper and echo. "Shepherd, guide, psychopomp, whatever we need to be called. But you," she smiled, "you've been working overtime." The morgue lights buzzed and the hands on every clock in the hospital spun wildly, stopping at 11:47. "I don't want whatever this is," Irene said, backing away from Eleanor. "It doesn't matter," Eleanor replied. "It wanted you. It found you that night. It wore your guilt until it became your skin." The hum of the fluorescence grew into a deafening drone. Irene's ears rang. Shadows pressed against the wall on the far side of the room, faces she knew, Dr. Kemper, Madison, the man from Bay 4, all pale, eyes hollow, waiting. Irene held her eyes shut. "Please, I just want to go home." Eleanor tilted her head, wings shivering in the cold air. "Then go. He's waiting for you." And suddenly Irene was standing in her own kitchen, dawn light cutting through the blinds. The smell of sweat and bourbon invaded her nostrils. Leonard slumped at the table, a half-empty bottle hanging precariously from the tips of his fingers. He lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, mouth curling into that cruel, familiar smirk. "You think you can just leave?" He stood, his chair squealing against the no-wax floor. Irene didn't move. Behind her, something scraped against the wall. Eleanor's voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. "You hurt me, Irene. And now it's your turn." Leonard's hand whipped out and wrapped around Irene's wrist, the bruise spreading out from beneath his fingers. He locked down like a vice and twisted to break bone. Irene cried once, and Leonard froze. A moment of deafening silence. Leonard's eyes went wide, pupils vast and coal-black. The veins in his neck bulged and stretched up the side of his face. His mouth opened in a silent howl, and his tongue swelled fat like a blood-gorged leech. He gasped, clawing at his throat with his free hand as frost formed on his lips. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her face a mask of stoicism. "You were supposed to walk away," she said, "but maybe this is better." Leonard's grip weakened slowly as he collapsed to the floor, eyes and mouth hanging open. The clock on the wall ticked once and stopped. Irene turned as the bruise faded from her arm. "What happens now?" Eleanor smiled softly and brushed a strand away from Irene's face. "Now you finish your shift." And with a breath, the olive green of the kitchen dissolved into sterile white, and the hum of the fluorescence returned to Irene's ears. Irene was back behind the nurse's station at St. Gloria Memorial. It was Saturday, May 15th, 1976. The clock read 11:47. A door banged open at the end of the hall. "We've got one coming in," hollered Dr. Kemper. "Male, mid-30s, car accident. Let's go, people." Irene rose automatically and pulled on a pair of gloves. The ivory skin of her wrists was soft and unmarked. The ER doors hissed open and the paramedics burst through, pushing a gurney, slick with rain. The patient's shirt was soaked with blood, his eyes wide and glassy. "Single vehicle collision," one of them called out. "Massive trauma to the head and neck." Irene glanced down at the intake clipboard. It was blank except for one word already scribbled in her own handwriting. Leonard. Thank you so much for joining me for this 17th episode of Storytime with Mr. C. That was my latest spooky story, Psychopomp and Circumstance, and for now, that's all he wrote, folks. Literally, that's it, at least for a little while on the spooky stories. Next week, on November 2nd, we will go back to some non-fiction autobiographical material as we dig into the stories of the matriarchs. These will be stories written by my mom, her mom, and even her mom's mom. In the meantime, send me some new material. Tell me how Halloween treated you. Go find Drive-By High Five and go check out Ben's podcast, Chasing the Whimsy. Go do all of that. Thanks again for hanging out and listening to my story. Hope you come on back for the next one. Until then, take care. Be safe.